Tyrion sat in the gloom of his cell, gazing at the melting tallow candle on the rough table, waiting for Oberyn Martell to appear. There had been whispers through the Red Keep that the Prince of Dorne might champion him in the trial by combat, whispers that had sparked a rare flicker of hope in Tyrion's weary heart. He recalled Oberyn's words in the throne room. They had promised more than most, the chance to answer for old crimes and reveal old truths. And yet, he also felt the heavy weight of doubt settle on him like an iron cloak. Was Oberyn Martell truly so reckless or so cunning as to risk his own life for Tyrion's cause? Footsteps echoed down the corridor. The torchlight wavered against the walls, casting twisting shadows on the damp stone. Tyrion rose to his feet as best he could. His chains rattled like a snake's hiss, reminding him of how precarious his situation was. He heard the guards exchange a few muffled words. Then one of them unlatched the door. It grated open, revealing Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dorne. Tall, lithe, and radiating a coiled energy, Oberyn strode in with Ellaria Sand at his side. Ellaria's dark eyes lingered on Tyrion, giving him a gentle, somewhat sorrowful look. She could see the toll these days of imprisonment had taken on him. Tyrion tried not to let his desperation show, but he suspected he failed. There were many humiliations he'd endured since the trial began. Yet no humiliation stung quite so keenly as being powerless in the face of certain death. Oberyn nodded to Ellaria, who let the door close behind them. Then the Red Viper fixed Tyrion with that same intense gaze he'd worn in their last meeting. Only this time, there was a shadow behind his dark eyes. Tyrion felt a twist in his gut. The Red Viper's stance was more guarded than before. He did not greet Tyrion with the sly smile or the bold promise that he would fight in his name. Instead, Oberyn remained silent, letting the torchlight dance in his eyes and highlight the ridges of his prominent cheekbones. Tyrion found his voice hoarse but firm. "Prince Oberyn," he said. "You came." "I did," Oberyn replied. His voice was as smooth as polished silk, but the tension within him was clear. "I gave my word that I would speak with you once more before decisions were made." Tyrion's eyes flickered from Oberyn to Ellaria. She stood behind him, her posture subdued. Tyrion's heart beat faster. He did not see the triumph he had expected in their faces. "I'm sure you've heard," Tyrion continued, clearing his throat. "I stand accused of murdering my nephew, a crime I think we both know I did not commit." Oberyn nodded slightly. "Yes, you did not kill Joffrey, nor did you kill my sister Elia or her children." His jaw tightened at the mention of Elia. That was the old wound, the one that never closed. "Yet I believed I could see justice done if I fought in your name." Tyrion felt a surge of apprehension. "Believed?" he repeated softly. "Is that no longer what you believe now?" For a long moment, Oberyn was silent. Ellaria moved forward, close to Oberyn's side, and placed her hand on his forearm. Tyrion could almost sense the currents of emotion that passed between them, unspoken but palpable. At last, Oberyn let out a measured breath. "I have spent many hours pondering this, Tyrion Lannister. It is true Gregor Clegane is the one I need. He is the one who did Tywin Lannister's bidding, who brutalized and murdered my sister. I have waited years for a chance to face him and make him pay in blood." Tyrion's pulse hammered in his ears. He clasped his hands before him to hide the tremor in them. "Then champion me, Prince Oberyn," he urged. "Cersei has chosen the Mountain as her champion. Face him, defeat him, claim your vengeance in the sight of all of King's Landing." Oberyn's gaze shifted away, as though seeking answers in the shadows of the cell. "I have grown accustomed to dancing with death," he said softly. "I have dueled many, traveled across the seas to Essos, tested poisons on my own blade. And yet, every time I have done so knowing what it might cost me. I was willing to pay with my own blood if it meant avenging Elia." "Then?" Oberyn closed his eyes. "But there is more at stake now than vengeance. My brother Doran, the Prince of Dorne, has reminded me of our people. The power balance, the shifting alliances. We do not stand alone. We must not act rashly." He paused, letting the stone walls echo with unspoken regrets. I also have Ilaria and I have daughters. The world is changing. Dorne must not lose its prince in a single spectacular duel that might leave all my efforts in ashes. The breath left Tyrion's lungs in a rush. You're refusing. Oberyn's eyes opened, sharp and dark. Yes, he said quietly. I am. I came here to tell you myself in private. I will not champion you. I will not fight the mountain in the trial by combat. Tyrion stood there, his small form still behind the table, shoulders hunched, expression stricken. Though he was an eloquent man, usually one gifted with a quick tongue, at that moment he had no words. He'd never considered the possibility that Oberyn would change his mind. It had seemed so certain, as though the Red Viper had been conjured by the gods to save him at the last second. That illusion shattered now. All Tyrion could do was blink. For the first time since his father had pronounced his guilt, he felt genuine terror creep into his bones. Without Oberyn, who else in this entire city would stand for him? I'm doomed, Tyrion finally said, the words hollow in his mouth. You realize that? Oberyn hesitated, then moved a single step closer, enough for Tyrion to see the empathy in his gaze. I am truly sorry, he murmured. I wish to help you, but I cannot. My brother has made certain points plain to me. If I die here, nothing changes for Dorne. The lords of the Reach and the Crownlands would swallow us whole. The vengeance for Elia would remain incomplete, no matter who slew whom in the arena. All that might be left is a new and greater cause for war. And a war that could break out at any time is not something our people can afford. Doran Martell is wise, Ilaria said softly, stepping closer to Tyrion. He counseled Oberyn to remember that vengeance, if not carefully measured, can destroy the Avenger. I love Oberyn too dearly to see him throw his life away. Tyrion's lips parted. He wanted to beg, to shame them, to do something to persuade them otherwise. But somewhere in the rational corner of his mind, he understood. Clegane was not to be trifled with. Oberyn was skilled, yes, but the mountain was monstrous in size and strength. It was no small risk. Tyrion attempted a faint smile. I cannot blame you, he managed. I just wish it could be otherwise. For another long moment, silence reigned. Oberyn placed a hand gently on Tyrion's shoulder, a brief gesture of solidarity. I will speak to your father, he said, though I do not know if it will help. Perhaps I can convince him to show leniency. I will try to remind him that his son, if found guilty, might need the king's mercy. The Lannisters owe me at least that much. Tyrion's laugh escaped him, brittle as glass. I do not think my father knows the meaning of mercy. Nevertheless, I will try, Oberyn said. Ilaria gave Tyrion one last sorrowful glance. The door opened, and Oberyn and Ilaria slipped out, leaving Tyrion behind with the flickering candle that would soon sputter out. Tyrion watched their departing forms in numb dread. Then the door shut with a heavy clang. He felt as though he had aged a year in that short conversation. He sank to the cold floor, the weight of his chains making his knees ache. The guard outside rattled the door and locked it. Tyrion was alone with his fear and the knowledge that all hope might have just drained away. The dawn brought no relief. Tyrion hardly slept, haunted by illusions of the mountain crushing his head like an overripe fruit. His mind spun in frantic circles. Who else could he ask to champion him? Bronn was gone, purchased by a promise of a castle and a wife. Jaime was no longer the swordsman he had been before losing his hand. Besides, Jaime was hardly free to defy their father. No knight in the Seven Kingdoms would volunteer to face the mountain for a dwarf who had been declared a kingslayer and traitor. Meanwhile, Oberyn Martell slept fitfully in the suite granted to him in the Red Keep. He would have expected to relish the nights in King's Landing. There were wines to be tasted, women and men to share in carnal pleasures, the thrill of danger at every corner. But the city felt suffocating now. He rose in the early light, leaving Ilaria wrapped in the golden sheets, and gazed out through a narrow window at the labyrinth of streets below. In the far distance, he could see the black sails of ships in the bay. A swirl of gulls danced overhead. In his mind, he replayed the night's conversation with Tyrion. He recalled the desperation in the dwarf's eyes when Oberyn told him he would not fight. That desperation had not left Oberyn's own heart unscathed. "Am I truly a coward?" Oberyn murmured to himself. "Have I turned my back on my sister after all these years?" The thought tasted bitter. He clenched his fists. No, he was not a coward, but he was not fool enough to ignore the counsel of his brother. Ellaria had also pleaded with him. She had shed tears in his arms, fearing for him. And so, the Red Viper had chosen caution over the hunger for vengeance that had guided him for half his life. He left the chamber quietly so as not to disturb Ellaria. He passed a pair of Lannister guards who bowed stiffly. Oberyn's mood smoldered as he threaded his way through the corridors, heading for a small courtyard with lemon trees. He had discovered it upon his arrival, a quiet refuge from the decadent chaos of the palace. In the courtyard, the small orchard stood in a patch of pale morning sun. A bench carved from white marble offered a seat, and there, to his mild surprise, he found Prince Oberyn's niece by marriage, the Queen Regent herself, Margaery Tyrell. She was sitting alone, absently stroking the petals of a lemon blossom. At his approach, Margaery's face lit with its usual courtesy. "Prince Oberyn," she said with practiced charm. "I did not expect company this early." Oberyn gave a graceful bow. "Your Grace, the last thing I'd wish to do is intrude." "Not at all. The morning is too fine for solitude." She gestured for him to sit. In the distance, a few sparrows hopped through the lemon grove, pecking at seeds on the ground. "The city is so tense these days," Margaery said. "I cherish these quiet moments." Oberyn lowered himself onto the bench, crossing one leg over the other. He knew Margaery Tyrell was more cunning than she seemed. She was not one to while away her time idly. A meeting with her could be anything but coincidence. "Tense indeed," he answered, "though tension is a constant companion for those who dwell in the Red Keep." She offered him a faint, knowing smile. "I heard you spoke with Tyrion Lannister last night. So the rumors fly swiftly." "Yes, I did." "And have you decided to champion him?" Oberyn arched an eyebrow. She was direct, though she disguised it as polite curiosity. "If I were to champion him, it would mean facing Gregor Clegane." Margaery kept her gaze on the lemon blossom in her hand, though there was a slight tightening around her mouth. "The mountain," she said quietly. "That man is a horror. Even my Lord Father trembles at what he might do when unleashed. He is indeed a horror, and a tool wielded by the Lannisters for too long." Oberyn paused, remembering Tyrion's anguish, and then his own fury at Elaya's fate. "But I have not made that choice. Are you still uncertain, Prince Oberyn?" He regarded her, wondering if she was truly curious or simply gathering intelligence for her house. But he decided that Margaery Tyrell was someone who might be a valuable ally, especially if he chose a different path to avenge Elia. "I am," he admitted. "I am thinking of leaving King's Landing soon and returning to Dorne." Margaery's eyes flicked up to meet his. "Truly? Before the trial concludes?" "It may be best. My brother's counsel weighs heavily on me, and you can see yourself how quickly alliances shift in this city. My presence here does not guarantee the justice I seek. I do not wish to see a war break out, especially if House Tyrell stands on the Lannister side of any conflict. That might lead to devastating battles with Dorne caught in the center. The time is not right for open confrontation." She lifted her chin, letting the lemon blossom drop to the ground. "Yet does that mean leaving Tyrion Lannister to his fate?" Oberyn set his mouth in a thin line. "I cannot save every Lannister who defies his own family. Perhaps it is not my place to save Tyrion." Margaery studied him, the hush of the morning settling around them. "If you do not fight, who will? I do not think anyone dares to face the mountain, and Tyrion will almost surely die. Perhaps." Oberyn glanced at the sun, which had risen higher over the city's rooftops. "Fate is cruel." They fell quiet. Margaery inclined her head, lips pressed together as though in pity. At last, Oberyn rose, bowing slightly to her. "It has been a pleasure, Your Grace. I hope you find a moment of peace here." She gave him a curt nod, and her eyes followed him as he left the lemon grove. Even if Oberyn refused to champion Tyrion, the cogs of King's Landing would continue to turn. Marjorie might see opportunities in Oberyn's refusal. Everyone, it seemed, had their own part to play in the Game of Thrones. 2 days later, the day of Tyrion's trial by combat arrived. But this time, Oberyn Martell was not present in the courtyard as he had been in the original course of events. The spectators gathered along the balconies of the Red Keep's training yard. Lord Tywin Lannister sat in judgment, flanked by Mace Tyrell and Prince Tommen, the Child King, who sat on the Iron Throne. The Mountain had arrived in his massive armor, a hulking giant who stood near Cersei, rolling his broad shoulders as if eager for the slaughter. Tyrion, wearing chains, stared at the far gates, hoping beyond hope that a champion would appear at the last second. But no champion came. A hush descended. The crowd rippled with hushed excitement. Here was Tyrion Lannister, once the hand of the king, now seemingly abandoned by all. Cersei allowed herself a triumphant smirk. Jaime, who stood behind Tywin, shifted uncomfortably. Oberyn watched from a distant vantage, high on a stone walkway, hidden from clear view. He had come only to see if the rumors were true, whether Tyrion truly had no champion. His lips pressed together when he saw the dismal truth. The herald announced Tyrion's name and the question of a champion. Silence. Tyrion's features contorted with despair. He turned pleading eyes toward the assembled knights, but none stepped forward. The herald repeated the call. Again, no one moved, though a few looked away, unwilling to meet Tyrion's gaze. At last, the herald turned to the Mountain. "By the laws of gods and men, Lord Tyrion Lannister has the right to a trial by combat. But no champion has answered his call. Ser Gregor Clegane, you stand for Queen Regent Cersei Lannister." The Mountain's deep growl echoed in the still air. "Yes," the herald swallowed. "And you are prepared to meet no foe." The words seemed almost absurd. He glanced toward Tyrion. "Lord Tyrion, without a champion, you must either stand for yourself or yield." Tyrion was no fool. He would stand no chance against the Mountain. His shoulders sagged, and for a brief instant, his eyes flickered upward, as if searching the ramparts for Oberyn. Their gazes locked. Oberyn froze. He saw the flicker of both betrayal and understanding in Tyrion's eyes. A single moment stretched into eternity, and then Tyrion said softly, "I yield." A murmur passed through the crowd. Tywin Lannister inclined his head with grave finality. "Then by the law you are found guilty of the murder of King Joffrey. The punishment is death." Tommen shifted uncomfortably on the Iron Throne, his round face pale with uncertainty. He looked to his mother, who lifted her chin in cold satisfaction. Jaime's jaw tightened, and he cast a furious look at his father, but he said nothing. The sentence was passed. Tyrion's face had gone ashen. At that moment, Oberyn felt a pang of remorse so sharp it nearly forced him to act. Every nerve in his body screamed to leap down, call out that he would fight. But the memory of Illyria's tears and Doran's warnings tangled him like heavy chains. He stayed still. The herald called for Tyrion's escort. A guard placed a heavy hand on Tyrion's shoulder and began marching him away. Tyrion's eyes held Oberyn's for a final moment. Then he disappeared behind the courtyard doors. Word spread throughout King's Landing that Tyrion Lannister was to be executed on the morrow. Some whispered that it would be a private beheading, so that no trouble would stir in the streets. Others laughed that the imp would meet the headsman at sunrise with no crowd to jeer him. But either way, it seemed inevitable. Tyrion's downfall was sealed. Oberyn retreated to his guest quarters, his mind swirling. He poured himself a goblet of wine and stared into its depths. The dream of slaying Gregor Clegane had kept him awake countless nights. He had told Tyrion, in that dim cell, how he wanted to hear the Mountain confess. And now that chance was gone. Tyrion would die and the Mountain would live. Oberyn felt as though the walls of the Red Keep were closing in. He could almost hear Elaya's voice, asking him if he had forgotten her. He swallowed the wine in one gulp, but its warmth did nothing to ease the chill in his bones. Ilaria entered the chamber, her expression tense. "My love," she whispered, coming close. "What troubles you? You've been pacing all afternoon." "I watched him yield," Oberyn said, his voice low. "He will die in the morning." Ilaria sighed. "I know. I am sorry, Oberyn, but this is what you chose." "Is it?" he asked softly, setting the goblet aside. "Did I truly choose this? Or did my fear of losing you, losing my daughters, losing Dorne, steal my choice from me?" His eyes burned with conflicting emotion. "Perhaps it was not the wrong choice, but it feels vile to let this happen." She took his hands in hers. "If you died fighting the mountain, how would that have helped Tyrion? How would it have helped Elia? You might have killed Gregor, yes, but perhaps he would have killed you. Cersei would not let you leave alive after such a spectacle. This city would riot. The crown might blame Dorne, and Doran would have to choose between submission and war. The consequences could be disastrous." Her words were rational, but rationality was small comfort to a man whose life had been fueled by righteous fury for so many years. Oberyn pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "Perhaps you're right," he murmured, "but I cannot rest. I must speak with Tyrion once more, tonight before they—" He paused, unable to form the word. Ilaria nodded. "The guards may not allow it." Oberyn stepped back, a flinty resolve in his gaze. "They will if they wish to keep our alliance. I will speak to Lord Tywin if I must, or I will slip in quietly. But I cannot let Tyrion die without hearing what he knows about my sister's murder." He exhaled. "Gregor will not confess, but Tyrion, perhaps he knows something. Perhaps his father told him more than we know." Ilaria clasped Oberyn's hand. "Then go. Find peace. But promise me you will be careful." He pressed a tender kiss to her lips. "I promise." Night had descended over King's Landing by the time Oberyn slipped through the winding corridors leading to the black cells. He carried a small lantern, the flame dancing in the darkness. Outside Tyrion's cell, 2 guards stiffened at his approach, but he fixed them with a regal stare and said, "I am Prince Oberyn Martell. I would speak with the prisoner. Open the door." They hesitated, but the Martell name carried weight, and the tension in the city was thick. Few wanted to be the one who offended the visiting Prince of Dorne. At length, the guards unbolted the door and let Oberyn inside. The cell was cold, damp, and smelled of old straw and despair. Tyrion lay on a cot, eyes half closed, but at the sound of footsteps he stirred. When he saw Oberyn, a mirthless smile curved his lips. "You've come to watch me die in my cell? That's a new twist on the spectacle." Oberyn braced the lantern on a hook in the wall. Its meager glow revealed Tyrion's sunken cheeks and hollow eyes. "I came to speak." "Tyrion, Tyrion let out a short, humorless laugh. "Let me guess. You're here to pay your condolences? Or perhaps glean the final spark of knowledge from the doomed dwarf? Come, then, let's have it." He swung his legs off the cot and faced Oberyn. Bitterness laced every word. "You refused me, and now you come in the 11th hour, on the eve of my execution. Why?" Oberyn couldn't hide the flicker of shame across his face. "I deserve your anger," he said, voice low. "I am sorry, but this is about Elia." Tyrion narrowed his eyes. "Elia Martell," he repeated, some of his bitterness subsiding into curiosity. "Of course, your sister. You wanted to avenge her by killing Gregor. But now you will watch Gregor live, and watch me die." Oberyn fought the urge to flinch. "Yes," he said, "and it torments me. But I had no choice." "Everyone has a choice," Tyrion snapped. Then his shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him as quickly as it had sparked. "But it hardly matters now." Oberyn set his jaw. "I must know. Do you have proof that Tywin ordered the deaths of Elia and her children? Or did Gregor act alone?" Tyrion barked out a harsh laugh. "Proof? You think my father confessed such a thing to me?" "Tyrion, the family disgrace, the one he's prepared to have executed. He shook his head. No, Tywin is not so stupid as to leave any evidence behind. But do I believe he ordered Gregor's atrocities during the sack of King's Landing? Yes. All the songs claim it was Gregor's idea. But it wasn't. My father would never have left such an action to chance. Killing Rhaegar's wife and children was a means to ensure the Targaryen line was extinguished. It was the surest path to securing peace with King Robert. Oberyn clenched his fists, feeling the old rage swirl anew. So he gave the order. He killed Elia as surely as if he had done it himself. Yes, Tyrion murmured. He did. Even if no one can prove it. He looked at Oberyn with tired eyes. Does that help you find peace? Knowing that you have your confirmation from me? Some, Oberyn said. But Tywin's power is immense. Even with the truth, I cannot strike him down. Not yet. I do not have the allies I need to overthrow the Lannisters. And if I do so without cunning, all of Dorne will pay the price. Tyrion nodded slowly. Your brother, Doran, is a careful man. My sister once told me that Doran's cunning was like a snake lying in wait beneath the sand. He is careful, Oberyn agreed. He has plans, but they are as subtle as the desert wind. Perhaps we will wait for the right moment. He took a step forward, lowering his voice. I am truly sorry I could not champion you. Gregor has to die, but not like this. Not at such a risk that would plunge Dorne into ruin. I was so close to ignoring my brother's advice, but I could not. Tyrion's eyes held Oberyn's for a moment, and Oberyn saw that spark of intelligence, that deep well of cunning that had served Tyrion well, until it didn't. I understand, Tyrion said finally. You did what you had to do, as did I. He let out a long breath. I won't pretend I'm not furious, or that I don't blame you for leaving me to the headsman's axe. But I know how fate works. My father orchestrates the board. He always has. Oberyn moved closer still. I cannot promise to save you now, he said quietly. But if an opportunity presents itself for me to help you escape, I will. I plan to speak with your brother Jaime, or perhaps even Varys. The spider is always weaving his webs, and he might see a use for you. This is not a guarantee, he added swiftly. I am no master of whisperers, but I will try, if only to deny Tywin the satisfaction of your head. A ghost of a smile appeared on Tyrion's lips. You overestimate your influence. Still, if you can do anything, I won't say no. They stood in silence for a time, the drip of water somewhere beyond the cell's walls marking seconds passing by in slow, mournful taps. Oberyn laid a hand on Tyrion's shoulder, feeling the trembling tension there. Then he turned to the door, lifted the lantern from its hook, and prepared to leave. Oberyn, Tyrion said. He paused. Yes, tell my brother that I'm sorry. For all of it. Oberyn inclined his head. I will. He signaled to the guards, and the door opened. Outside, the corridor seemed colder than before, or perhaps it was Oberyn's heart that had grown cold. He whispered a silent oath as he left, wondering if tomorrow's sunrise would bathe the city in red once more. Morning broke over King's Landing, painting the rooftops in pale gold. On the Iron Throne, Tommen sat uncomfortably, flanked by Ser Meryn Trant and Queen Regent Cersei. This was to be Tyrion's final hour. Tywin had chosen to hold the execution in the throne room, behind closed doors, so as not to risk a riot among the small folk. Only a select few were in attendance. The Kingsguard, a handful of lords, and Prince Oberyn Martell among them. A hush fell as Tyrion was marched forward in chains. He cast a quick look around, but no rescue party awaited him. Jaime stood near the side of the hall, a haunted look in his eyes. Tyrion opened his mouth as though to speak, but a guard shoved him to his knees before the dais. The hush in the chamber was absolute. Tywin rose from his seat beside the throne. Tyrion Lannister, he pronounced, each word measured. You have been found guilty of regicide and high treason. By the laws of gods and men, you are sentenced to die. A headsman in black stepped forward, hood drawn. He was armed with a long sword, not the customary heavy axe. Tyrion's breath caught. He looked to Jaime, whose eyes filled with helpless sorrow. Then Tyrion's gaze found Oberyn. The Dornish prince stood stiff, arms folded. But the flicker in Oberyn's eyes told Tyrion he was braced for something. Cersei watched, satisfaction glittering in her stare. She nodded at the headsman. "Proceed," she said coolly. The headsman drew his sword and stepped around to face Tyrion. Tyrion closed his eyes, bracing for the blade. Yet even as the cold steel pressed against his neck, the throne room doors banged open. All heads swiveled. Standing in the entrance, flanked by a coterie of gold cloaks, was Varys, the master of whisperers. He bowed deeply, his face solemn. "Forgive the intrusion, my lords and ladies. A raven arrived this morning from the wall. It bears urgent tidings regarding the threat in the north. Lord Tywin, your grace, the realm must hear these tidings before any final judgments are carried out." Tywin, startled, gestured sharply for the headsman to halt. "What news?" he snapped, clearly irritated. Varys approached, footsteps echoing on the marble floor. He cast a glance at Tyrion, then bowed again to Tywin. "The wildlings are on the move in great numbers, Lord Tywin. Thousands. The Night's Watch is threatened, and King Stannis Baratheon has sailed north to aid them. If Stannis emerges victorious, it may change the balance of power in the realm." A ripple of unease crossed Tywin's face. Cersei frowned. "Stannis? He is a defeated pretender. Why do we care if he battles wildlings?" Varys inclined his head. "Because if he crushes them, the North may rally to his banner. And if they do, they will march south as soon as the snows relent. This is not a rumor, my lord. The Raven carries more details. They speak of creatures beyond the wall, an ancient threat stirring in the winds of winter. All the talk is of an unstoppable force." "Ridiculous," Cersei hissed. But Tywin did not look so certain. Into this pregnant pause, a shout rang from the corridor behind Varys. "Make way!" And who should stride in but Jaime Lannister, pushing through the guards, a frantic expression on his face. He limped slightly, his single hand resting on his sword hilt. "Father, wait!" Jaime called out, voice raw. "We cannot do this." "Tyrion is." Tywin's voice cracked like a whip. "Silence, Jaime." Jaime's eyes flashed. "No," he said, stepping forward. "I will not be silent. We are on the brink of war in the north. The kingdom is uneasy. Killing Tyrion now will only show our enemies how divided we are. It will weaken us further." Cersei snorted. "This is nonsense. One has nothing to do with the other." Jaime took a ragged breath. "Father, if you kill Tyrion, you lose my loyalty forever." The words fell like a hammer. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Tywin's nostrils flared. He looked at Jaime with cold fury. "You dare threaten me?" "I dare." Jaime's voice rang. "I have lost much at your command, but I will not stand by and watch you execute my brother. If you do, I am done with House Lannister. I will leave King's Landing and never return." A stunned silence followed. Oberyn found himself caught between surprise and an odd flicker of hope. Varys cleared his throat delicately. "My lords, perhaps reason can yet prevail. The realm needs stability. If we begin by slaughtering our own kin, that stability phrase." Cersei's face burned with rage. "You would coddle him after he murdered Joffrey? He is a traitor, a kingslayer. Sister, you speak as if you never heard a lie before. Joffrey's murderer is still at large. If you truly believe Tyrion did it, you are blinder than I thought." Jaime glared at her, his jaw tight. "Father, I beg you, spare Tyrion and send him to the wall if you must. Let him take the black. But do not stain our name further by executing your own son." At those words, Oberyn saw Tywin's mask of composure falter. The Lord of Casterly Rock was a man of unstoppable will, but he also prized the unity of his family. And Jaime, for better or worse, was the last golden son he had left. Now that Tyrion stood condemned, the fathers and sons' gazes locked in a silent duel of authority. Finally, Tywin spoke through clenched teeth. "Very well. We will show mercy for the sake of the realm. Tyrion Lannister shall take the black. Shock and relief spread across the assembled watchers. Tyrion sagged with something akin to gratitude and despair all at once. Cersei looked at her father in disbelief, but when she opened her mouth to protest, Tywin silenced her with a glare. The headsman lowered his sword. Jaime let out a breath, relief warring with the knowledge that he had just crossed a line he could never return from. Tywin gestured to a pair of gold cloaks. Escort Tyrion to the dungeons. He will remain there until a ship can be arranged to send him to the wall. This is my final decision. Anyone who contests it will face my wrath. He pivoted on his heel, cloak swirling, and made his way out of the throne room. Cersei stalked after him, her expression livid. Tommen, perched on the throne, looked overwhelmed, unsure of what his own role had been in any of this. Behind them, Tyrion was dragged to his feet. He locked eyes with Jaime, who gave him a faint nod. Tyrion tried to speak, but the words would not come. Then they led him away, the cell door's dark promise still waiting for him, but with a slim chance of survival beyond it. For Oberyn Martell, who observed this entire scene from the sidelines, it was a strange and unexpected resolution. Tyrion would live. The mountain would remain unpunished. But at least this was not the outcome he had dreaded. When Oberyn returned to his chambers, Illyria was already waiting, pacing in anxious circles. I heard the news. Tyrion is to be sent to the wall. She paused, searching Oberyn's face. Does that satisfy you? Oberyn breathed out, raking a hand through his dark curls. Satisfy me? I am not sure. I wanted Clegane's blood on my spear. Instead, Tyrion is spared, but only by a thread. I fear we still teeter on the brink of chaos. Illyria came to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Chaos may come, but so too might opportunity, she said quietly. If Tyrion is banished to the wall, the Lannisters will owe you no small debt for your silence in these proceedings. You did not contest Tywin's will, nor did you champion Tyrion. You remain neutral in a sense. Neutral, Oberyn repeated, tasting the word. That is not a color that suits me. I have always burned too brightly to remain neutral. She kissed him lightly on the cheek. We must be what we need to be for Dorne to survive. Perhaps that means you stay your hand until the time is ripe. Oberyn nodded slowly, though deep within him, the thirst for vengeance still churned. Maybe one day, when the Game of Thrones shifted in such a way that he could strike with impunity, he would do so. On the eve of Tyrion's departure, Oberyn ventured once more to the dungeons. This time, Varys greeted him in the corridor, having just finished speaking with Tyrion. The spider's face was unreadable as always. Prince Oberyn, Varys said, I trust you have come to bid Tyrion farewell? Oberyn inclined his head. Yes, may I enter? Varys stepped aside, extending a delicate hand. Of course, do not be too long. They will be leaving before dawn. Inside, Tyrion was unshackled, save for a thin chain about his ankle to prevent him from fleeing. He turned as Oberyn entered, a wry look in his eye. Prince Oberyn, he said quietly, I admit I didn't expect to see you again. I thought your purpose here was done. I am not a man who leaves things half-finished, Oberyn replied. He studied Tyrion, noting the hollowness in his face, but also the spark of survival. Tomorrow, they say, you will depart by ship to Eastwatch by the Sea, and from there travel to the Wall. I have never been so far north. I've only heard tales. Tyrion sighed. Nor have I, though I've wanted to see the Wall once. A boy's dream, to stand atop its icy ramparts. I never imagined going there in chains. Oberyn nodded. Perhaps you will find a way to make a life there. The Night's Watch may value your cunning, if not your size. A mirthless chuckle escaped Tyrion's lips. We shall see. At least I won't lose my head, yet. Silence grew between them. Oberyn stepped closer, clasping his hands behind his back. I do not ask your forgiveness, he said, but I do ask that you remember. I had to weigh my personal vengeance against the needs of Dorne. If circumstances ever change, If I see a chance to bring Gregor Clegane to justice, I will take it. Perhaps one day you might even aid me." Tyrion's brows lifted. "You want me as an ally? A sworn brother of the Night's Watch, far in the north, with no power but the black cloak on my shoulders. Stranger alliances have been forged in Westeros," Oberyn mused. "And you are, if nothing else, resourceful." Tyrion studied him. "I'll keep that in mind, though from what I hear, our greatest enemy up there might be the cold. Or perhaps the others, if the stories are true." Oberyn allowed himself a small smile. "Then keep yourself alive. I suspect the realm will need every bit of wit it can muster in the days to come." They regarded each other in silence for a moment. Tyrion extended his hand, and Oberyn clasped it. No further words passed between them, for none were needed. Then Oberyn turned and left the cell, leaving Tyrion to whatever restless sleep he could find. At dawn, the royal party assembled at the harbor. A few onlookers stared in grim curiosity as Tyrion was brought in a closed litter, escorted by 2 rows of gold cloaks. Jaime had not come to bid him farewell. Tywin had likely forbidden it, but Oberyn stood at a distance, watching the proceedings from the shadows of a fishmonger's stall. He saw Tyrion step out of the litter, chains rattling, glancing around at the ships in the bay. Varys was there, exchanging a few words with the captain of a sturdy vessel outfitted for the rough waters of the narrow sea. With no further ado, Tyrion was led aboard. A few minutes passed, and the ship's lines were cast off. The sails caught the early morning breeze, and the vessel drifted away from the dock. Tyrion's last glimpse of King's Landing would be the spires of the Red Keep glinting in the new sun. Oberyn exhaled, watching until the ship was no more than a speck against the horizon. The day was bright, the gulls crying overhead. Somehow, all of it seemed incongruous with the dark swirl of ambition and regret in his heart. The next day, Oberyn found himself standing before Tywin Lannister in the solar reserved for guests of the court. Tywin was behind a desk stacked with parchments, a quill in hand. He barely glanced up when Oberyn entered. "Prince Oberyn," he said curtly. "What business brings you here so early?" Oberyn inclined his head. "I intend to depart King's Landing soon. I have had my fill of this place." Tywin set aside his quill, regarding Oberyn with cold detachment. "Is that so? I trust you will convey our respects to Prince Doran." "I shall," Oberyn said. "But before I leave, I came to discuss one matter." She wore a look of subdued relief. "Have you said your last goodbyes?" "I have said what needed to be said," Oberyn replied. "And I suspect Tywin knows this was no goodbye at all, merely a prelude." They departed King's Landing that very noon, crossing the city on horseback with a dozen Dornish guards. The small folk parted to let them pass. Some called out to them, for the Dornish had earned a certain reputation, either fear or admiration, depending on the vantage. Oberyn lifted his chin, allowing the warm sun to shine upon his face. Illyria's presence beside him steadied his thoughts, reminding him that there was still joy in living. As they crossed the city gates and set out along the Rose Road, Oberyn glanced back at the capital once more. The Red Keep perched on its rocky promontory, the high walls glowering. Inside those walls, men like Tywin Lannister and the Mountain still wielded power with an iron fist. But Oberyn Martell was leaving them behind, for now. He spurred his horse onward. The Dornish entourage kept a swift pace, eager to escape the stench and tension of the capital. After hours of riding, the golden afternoon gave way to a gentle evening, and they made camp by a stream near a copse of elm trees. As the sun sank low, Oberyn sat with Illyria by the water's edge, dipping his hands in the cool stream, letting the swirl of water run through his fingers. "I wonder what the future holds," Illyria murmured. Oberyn's lips curved into a bittersweet smile. "Blood and fire, if history is any guide," he said. "But perhaps also a chance for Dorne to stand taller than ever before. Doran's plans remain a mystery even to me, but I trust that the pieces are in motion." She touched his arm. "Do you think we did the right thing, walking away from that duel?" He closed his eyes, recalling Tyrion's terror, Gregor's looming figure, the ghost of Elia's last screams in his memory. "I think it was the necessary thing," he said at last. "Right or wrong I cannot say, but necessary, yes." He opened his eyes to the setting sun, painting the sky in rose and lavender. "If I had fought the mountain in that trial by combat, perhaps I would have slain him, or perhaps he would have slain me. Either way, I suspect Cersei and Tywin would have found another abomination to hide their sins, and Dorne might have paid the price. My people need me alive." Ellaria nodded, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And I need you alive. Let the Lannisters stew in their own poison. We will have our day yet." He wrapped an arm around her, and they sat in reflective silence, listening to the gentle rustle of the water. Overhead, a few stars began to pierce the dusk. Oberyn lifted his gaze to the scattered glimmers of light. For years, he had been consumed by a single burning desire: vengeance. Tonight, that vengeance was deferred, but not denied. A cunning snake does not strike without cause. A viper waits until it is sure. In the morning, they broke camp early, continuing their journey south. The Rose Road stretched before them, winding through the lush fields of the Reach. In the days to come, they would pass Highgarden, then travel across the Dornish marches, and finally cross the Prince's Pass into their homeland. The air would grow hotter, the red mountains rising in stark glory, until at last they reached Sunspear's bright towers. Throughout the ride, Oberyn found his thoughts drifting to Tyrion. A part of him wondered how the dwarf fared on his journey to the Wall. There, winter's chill bit at the flesh, and the men of the Night's Watch guarded an ancient fortification that dwarfed anything in the Seven Kingdoms. Perhaps Tyrion would find new purpose there. Perhaps he would die alone on those icy ramparts. Either way, the wheels of fate spun onward, carrying both men in different directions. Across the narrow sea, the ship bearing Tyrion Lannister pitched and rolled under a leaden sky. Salt spray stung his face as he leaned on the rail, ignoring the chain around his ankle. The gold-cloaked guard who had been assigned to watch him sat a few paces away, chewing on stale bread. Tyrion's mind roiled like the sea. He had once journeyed north as a free man, curious to see the edge of the world. Now he traveled in chains, heading for a lifetime oath that would strip him of any claim to family or inheritance. But at least it was life, and with life came a chance, however slim, to shape his own destiny again. He recalled Oberyn's words about vengeance. Would the Red Viper ever find the chance to strike down Gregor Clegane? Tyrion found he almost hoped so. The mountain was a nightmare that deserved to be ended. But it would not be by Tyrion's hand, or not anytime soon. He sighed, scanning the waves. The north beckoned, a great unknown of ice and darkness. And though Tyrion was an exiled convict, he felt a spark of defiance in his breast. The Lannisters of Casterly Rock were not easily crushed. If he had to reinvent himself on the Wall, so be it. Meanwhile, Oberyn's party pressed on through the Reach. The rolling fields and orchards slowly gave way to the more rugged terrain near the Dornish marches. As they passed village after village, Oberyn noticed how the common folk eyed them with suspicion or curiosity. The tension between Dorne and the rest of the Seven Kingdoms was never far beneath the surface. Old wounds from the wars of conquest, from the murder of Elia and her children, and from the current political wrangling all simmered. Oberyn did not relish the idea of yet another war, but he would not shy away from it if the day came. At one roadside inn where they paused for a midday meal, Oberyn overheard a group of travelers discussing the trial by combat that never was. "They say the Red Viper turned craven," a man snickered. "He wouldn't fight the mountain, lost his nerve." Oberyn's jaw clenched. He felt Ellaria's calming hand on his arm. He forced himself to remain still, to let the gossip wash over him like worthless chatter. In time, the truth would come out or not. It mattered little what random travelers thought. He had not shied from Gregor Clegane out of cowardice. He had withheld his spear to save his people from the ruin that Tywin might unleash. But the common folk would make their own tales. Perhaps it was better they believed him cowardly than realized Dorne's princely champion was scheming. Leaving the inn, Oberyn continued south, the dryness of the air growing more pronounced as they neared the Dornish border. Eventually, they crossed into the land of the sandy dunes, where the heat shimmered and scorched in midday. The ground turned from lush green to a rocky, dusty expanse dotted with desert plants. Oberyn's spirits lifted slightly, for here was home. The red mountains rose on the horizon like jagged teeth, and beyond them, the bright towers of Sunspear. When they finally arrived at Sunspear, a herald announced their return with a flourish of trumpets. Ellaria peeled away to freshen herself, while Oberyn went immediately to see his brother, Prince Doran. He found Doran in a shaded courtyard, seated in a wheeled chair, gazing over a tranquil reflection pool. Attendants hovered at a respectful distance. "Oberyn," Doran greeted, managing a gentle smile. "I trust the capital provided you with ample entertainment?" Oberyn snorted. "Entertainment, yes, and frustration." He approached, bending to kiss Doran's cheek in greeting. "Let us speak privately, brother." Doran gestured for his attendants to depart, and Oberyn lowered himself on a cushion near Doran's chair. In the heat of the day, the reflection pool's water offered a soothing glimmer, and breezes from the sea drifted through the open arches. "You refused to champion Tyrion?" Doran asked softly. "I received your raven." "I did. You warned me after all, and you were right. Had I fought, I might have died, or if I succeeded, I would have set off a chain of events leading to war. So I walked away." Doran gave a measured nod, folding his hands in his lap. "And how do you feel about that choice, dear brother?" Oberyn gazed at the ripples in the reflection pool. "I feel a longing for vengeance unfulfilled, but I also see that by surviving, I may yet find a better way to avenge Elia. We must be careful, cunning. Gregor Clegane remains Tywin's dog, but every dog has its day." Doran's dark eyes reflected both pain and resolve. "Elia's memory deserves justice, yes, but it must be the right time in the right way. Let the Lannisters think they have subdued us. Meanwhile, we will prepare." Oberyn nodded. "If you have some hidden plan, brother, I wish to be part of it. No more secrets." For a moment, Doran hesitated. Then he reached out, laying a gentle hand on Oberyn's arm. "When the time is right, you will know everything," he promised. "Until then, trust me." Oberyn tensed, but he bowed his head. "Very well." They spoke at length about the politics in King's Landing, about how Jaime Lannister had risked his father's wrath to spare Tyrion's life, and how Margaery Tyrell seemed poised to maintain her influence as Queen Regent. Doran listened quietly, absorbing every detail with calm concentration. Finally, Doran said, "You did well not to champion Tyrion. Let the Lannisters solve their own problems. They are falling apart from within, and you did not need to sacrifice yourself for them." Oberyn's jaw shifted slightly. "One day, I hope to see Gregor pay for what he did. But for now, yes, we let them devour themselves." Doran clasped Oberyn's hand. "Patience, brother, patience." It was not Oberyn's strongest virtue, but for the sake of Dorne, he would try. In the days that followed, Oberyn resumed his life in Sunspear with Ellaria at his side. He sparred with the palace guard, tested new poisons in the privacy of his workshops, and spent long nights in the arms of his lover, trying to banish the restless fire within him. Sometimes, in the hush of the night, he found himself staring at the ceiling, haunted by the memory of King's Landing's trial yard, of Tyrion's desperate eyes, of the chance he'd let slip away. Yet each time, Ellaria's warmth reminded him of the reasons he had turned away. He was not alone in this world. He had obligations to his family, to his daughters, to his people. A single duel, no matter how victorious, might not bring him the peace he sought. Vengeance needed to be fed with more than just a single stroke of a spear. In the weeks that stretched into months, news trickled in from the north. Tyrion had arrived at the Wall, his oath taken before the old gods and the new. Rumors swirled of wildling attacks, of Stannis pressing a claim from Castle Black. The realm was shifting, uncertain. Tywin Lannister remained the hand of the king, the true power behind Tommen's throne. Cersei seethed, Jaime questioned his loyalties, and Margaery Tyrell maneuvered with quiet skill. And all the while, Oberyn heard no mention of the mountain riding out, which meant Tywin kept his monstrous champion close. It was in the quiet hours of a scorching Dornish afternoon that Oberyn received a visit from a courier bearing a sealed message from King's Landing. Breaking the wax, he recognized Jaime Lannister's scrawl, the letter short and to the point. Tyrion had been assigned to the libraries at Castle Black, assisting the maester with records. He was alive for now. But the Watch was in dire straits, the threat of the wildlings and more obscure horrors looming. Jaime hinted that a confrontation might soon erupt. And in the subtext, Oberyn detected a faint plea. If you have any resource, any help you might send to the Wall, do it. Tyrion's life remains precarious. Oberyn folded the letter, turning it over in his hands. Ellaria saw the turmoil in his eyes. You want to help him, she said softly. Perhaps, Oberyn replied. Though sending Dornish spears to the Wall seems unlikely, my brother will not do so without good cause. Ellaria nodded, gazing out the archway at the shimmering dunes. And your cause is not truly the survival of the Night's Watch. You would only do it for Tyrion's sake. Or to gain a Lannister debt, Oberyn mused. Jaime Lannister might be a valuable ally someday. If he truly stands apart from his father, we might exploit that crack in the Lannister armor. She arched a brow. So you are thinking politically. That's good. He kissed her cheek. Always, he murmured. I will speak with Doran. If we cannot spare men, perhaps we can send ravens of support or gold. Even a small gesture might cement an alliance with Jaime. Ellaria smirked. Who would have thought the Red Viper of Dorne would seek alliances with Lannisters? Oberyn shrugged. The times change, my love. We must adapt. So Oberyn went to Doran with the letter, and they spent an entire evening discussing the potential for forging a secret correspondence with Jaime Lannister. Doran saw merit in it. Tywin is not eternal, he said. One day he will die, and the Lannisters may tear themselves apart with infighting. It might be prudent to have a bond with Jaime, who may be the only one with enough sense to hold them together. If we can influence him, it might prove useful. Thus, a new correspondence began, subtle as a serpent gliding through the sand. Letters flew between Sunspear and King's Landing, hidden behind coded phrases or carried by trusted writers. Oberyn and Jaime found a strained but earnest understanding. They both cared for Tyrion in their own way, both wanted to see him survive the hardships of the Wall, and both harbored a dislike for Tywin's iron-fisted approach. Over time, they shared tidbits of information, weaving the seeds of an unlikely alliance. Oberyn's refusal to fight for Tyrion had opened a different path, one where alliances were not forged in blood spilled on the trial sands, but in quiet pacts and hushed letters. It was not as dramatic, and it did not quench Oberyn's thirst to see the mountain dead. But it might, in the long run, prove far more devastating to House Lannister's darkest secrets. Across the seas of grass and dunes, the seasons rolled on. Though Westeros did not measure time in months and years so neatly, it was widely known that winter approached. The days grew shorter, and the nights carried a sharper bite, even in sun-scorched Dorne. Whispers reached Sunspear of trouble in the Riverlands, and the Ironborn stirring once more. The Tyrells remained allied with the Lannisters, but cracks began to appear in the facade of unity. Meanwhile, Cersei's resentment toward Margaery festered, threatened to boil over at any moment. Oberyn tracked it all from a distance, penning letter after letter with Doran's approval, weaving the tapestry of politics. Yet the specter of Gregor Clegane lingered in Oberyn's mind. Whenever he sparred with his captains, he imagined the mountain's hulking figure, the shock of facing that colossal strength. There were nights he dreamt of the duel that never happened, how he might have danced around the brute, drawing blood with his spear, driving the poison deeper. In some dreams, he triumphed. In others, he felt the mountain's gauntlet fists crush his skull. He would awake in a cold sweat, Ellaria's warm body pressed against him, bringing him back to reality. Patience, he told himself each dawn. Vengeance is a dish best served cold. Then, at last, the moment arrived when a raven brought startling news. Tywin Lannister was dead, found in his chambers with a crossbow bolt in his chest. The rumor was that Tyrion had escaped from the wall, somehow made his way back to King's Landing in secret, and murdered his father on the privy. The tales were wild, unconfirmed. Some said Varys had orchestrated it, then smuggled Tyrion away to the free cities. Oberyn, reading the message, felt his pulse thunder in his ears. Tywin Lannister was dead, and not by Oberyn's hand. For years, Oberyn had vowed to make Tywin pay for Elaya's murder. But now the Lannister patriarch was gone, denied him. He stared at the parchment, grappling with a wave of conflicting emotions. Relief, disappointment, confusion. It was said the Mountain still lived, though he had been gravely injured in some other skirmish. Rumors claimed he was near death himself, or had been spirited away by Qyburn's dark arts. There was no certainty. Ellaria found Oberyn in the Solar, holding the Raven's message. He told her the news. She took a sharp breath. Tywin gone. Then Cersei rules as regent with Tommen. Jaime is likely in turmoil. What does this mean for us? Oberyn let out a long breath. It means that the man who ordered Elaya's death has finally perished. But not by my hand, nor by any justice I orchestrated. It feels hollow. Ellaria slipped her hand into his. Justice can be strange. Perhaps Tyrion avenged you, even if he only intended to avenge himself. Oberyn nodded slowly, allowing the idea to sink in. Perhaps, and yet the Mountain still breathes. If I am to truly lay my sister's ghost to rest, I must see him fall. She squeezed his hand. We will see. Let us wait for Doran's counsel. The world changes. War may come, or alliances may shift. One day your spear will find its mark. Oberyn's eyes glinted. One day, he echoed softly. And so the Red Viper of Dorne continued his dance with fate. Neither hero nor coward, but a prince who had chosen to bide his time. He would never forget Elaya's name, never forgive the atrocities done to her. The story was not finished. For though Oberyn Martell had refused the trial by combat and spared his own life, destiny still wove an intricate tapestry of vengeance and redemption. Somewhere in the shadows of Westeros, Tyrion Lannister fled from justice or sought it in strange lands, the fate of the realm balancing on a knife's edge. And Oberyn Martell, with fire still burning in his veins, waited like a coiled serpent, knowing that every choice led down another path, one that might yet end with a reckoning for the Mountain, for the Lannisters, and for all those who believed the Red Viper had lost his bite. Oberyn Martell did not leave the Solar for some time after reading the Raven's message. The silence around him pressed close, broken only by the hiss of a desert breeze through the open arches. Tywin Lannister was dead. It should have felt like a triumph, or at least a long-awaited conclusion to years of bitter hatred, but Oberyn tasted only ashes. He had not driven the spear himself. He had not forced the Mountain to confess. The vengeance he had craved for so long had slipped through his fingers like sand. The letter's words felt surreal. The great Tywin Lannister, cold and calculating overlord of House Lannister, had perished ignobly on a privy, a crossbow bolt lodged in his chest. Rumor insisted Tyrion had done the deed, though Tyrion was supposed to be bound to the Night's Watch. Rumor also whispered that Varys had arranged everything and spirited Tyrion away into the shadows. Beyond that, the truth was anyone's guess. Ellaria Sand found Oberyn standing at the edge of the courtyard, hands braced against a column. He stared across the reflection pool without moving. She approached quietly, laying a gentle hand between his shoulder blades. "He's gone," Oberyn murmured, not turning, "and I cannot even claim that I had a hand in it." Ellaria pressed herself closer to him, resting her cheek on his shoulder. The warm air smelled of citrus and salt, and water trickled softly in the pool. "I know this grief isn't the grief of losing someone you love, but it still hurts when the moment you dreamed of arrives in a way you never imagined. Tywin was yours to kill, or so you believed." Oberyn let out a breath, turning to pull Ellaria into his arms. "I wanted his confession. I want him to say it plainly. He gave the order that led to Elaya's death. Now he's gone, and the Mountain still lives. Wounded or not, he is still out there, protected by those who remain loyal to the Lannisters." She looked up, brushing back a strand of his dark hair. If the rumors are true, then Tyrion took his own revenge after all. Maybe there is a kind of justice in that. He had cause to hate Tywin as much as you. It leaves me unsatisfied, Oberyn said, voice raw. And yet, I cannot deny that in losing Tywin, House Lannister is weakened. That is no small thing, for Dorne or for the rest of the realm. Ellaria nodded, guiding him to the cushioned bench near the pool. She urged him to sit, and he allowed it, feeling oddly drained. The sun had passed its zenith, and the lengthening shadows of the arches made the air more bearable. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Speak with Doran," Oberyn replied. "The game has changed. With Tywin gone, Cersei stands as Queen Regent, and Tommen is but a boy. Jaime Lannister is rumored to be in King's Landing still. Kevan Lannister too. Marjorie Tyrell remains queen to the Boy King. The alliances we left behind are in flux again. Dorne must decide if we watch from afar, or if we take steps to strengthen our position." Ellaria studied him, her dark eyes reflecting concern. "Has your rage diminished? Or does it burn just as fiercely?" He scoffed softly. "My anger is a constant, but it's shifted in shape. Tywin's death does not satisfy the vow I made for Elia. Gregor Clegane must answer for his crime, not slip away into the shadows. I only wonder if I can find him before Qyburn or some other cunning ally hides him behind castle walls. But for the moment, we must think of the future. A future in which House Lannister is no longer so unassailable." They lingered there a little while longer, hands entwined, gazing at the rippling water. Then Oberyn rose and strode from the courtyard with determined steps. Outside, the bright heat of the day remained. He went in search of his brother, finding Doran in another wing of the palace where the breeze circulated under tall columns of pale stone. Doran looked up from a small table on which maps of Westeros were spread. His face was unreadable, though Oberyn sensed the tension in his older brother's posture. For a moment, they surveyed each other in silence. "Come," Doran said gently, gesturing for Oberyn to sit. "You have heard the news." Oberyn settled into a seat opposite him. "Tywin is dead. Word has likely reached every corner of the realm by now, or soon will." Doran nodded. "A vacuum forms at the heart of King's Landing. Cersei is a cunning woman, but also proud and reckless. Jaime Lannister, perhaps more honorable than we once believed, but no friend to Dorne. Kevan is pragmatic, though overshadowed by Cersei's ambitions. The Tyrells are still allied to the crown, but with Tywin gone, they may push for greater influence." Oberyn exhaled, letting his gaze drift to the maps. "And where do we stand?" Doran steepled his fingers. "We stand in Dorne. That has always been our advantage, distance and independence. But we have a stake in the future of the Iron Throne. Our niece, Myrcella Baratheon, remains in Dorne under our protection." At that, Oberyn nodded slowly. "A valuable piece on the board. Cersei's daughter, though the Lannisters have never treated her with much warmth. She is betrothed to my son Trystane," Doran reminded him. "A betrothal arranged under one set of circumstances, when Tywin lived and the alliance between Crown and Dorne stood on slightly firmer ground. Now it may be time to reassess how we wield that betrothal." Oberyn tapped the table lightly with his fingertips. "Cersei will attempt to pull her daughter back under her own control, or at the very least, she will expect Myrcella to remain a hostage for Dorne's good behavior. But she won't be able to force the matter as easily without her father's strategic mind behind her." Doran reached for a small bowl of olives, plucked one, and popped it into his mouth, chewing thoughtfully. "We also have the question of the mountain. You made it plain that you would have killed him during Tyrion's trial by combat, but you refused. Now, rumor says Gregor was gravely wounded in another confrontation, or possibly inflicted with poison. Some claim he died, while others claim Qyburn is keeping him alive in secrecy." "Qyburn," Oberyn echoed with distaste. "A disgraced maester dabbling in unnatural arts. If Gregor lives, I suspect Qyburn meddles with him for Cersei's benefit. She would never let go of a weapon that formidable." Doran set aside the olive bowl. If we do anything about Clegane, it must be done carefully. I know how you hunger for his blood, dear brother. But the realm teeters on the edge of new chaos. The Ironborn remain a threat along the coasts. The Boltons hold the north under precarious terms, menacing the remnants of House Stark supporters. Stannis is rumored to be at the Wall, where the Night's Watch fights a war against wildlings. Oberyn almost laughed at the swirl of news, the endless litany of dangers. And somewhere, Tyrion Lannister roams free with a crossbow in hand, if the stories hold any truth. The imp who was once exiled to the Wall has now done what I did not. Claimed Tywin's life. Doran frowned slightly. You corresponded with Jaime Lannister for a time. Do you think that channel might still be open? We gleaned some advantages from those letters, though the messages became sparser as tensions rose. It might be, Oberyn said. But if Tyrion has indeed fled after killing Tywin, Jaime may be in disfavor with his sister. We might find him more approachable or less. He might blame us for the circumstances that led to Tyrion's condemnation, though I was not the one who named him guilty. Their own father did that. Doran let out a slow breath. We will wait to see if Jaime writes again. For now, we watch. If Cersei tries to recall Myrcella, we must weigh the risks and benefits. I do not intend to let that girl leave Dorne so easily. She is more valuable than ever. Oberyn mulled that over. Agreed. Cersei's hold on the throne is shaky. Myrcella's presence here is a guarantee of sorts, though ironically, I do not wish to harm the girl. She's an innocent. She's always seemed gentle when I've encountered her. One wonders how she emerged so sweet from such a family. Doran's voice softened. We are not monsters, Oberyn. We do not punish children for the sins of their parents. Silence lingered, thick with unresolved tension. Oberyn's thoughts flicked to Elaya's children, brutally slain. He wondered if Tywin Lannister, wherever his spirit had fled, felt any regret in those final moments. Perhaps the gods had not permitted him a shred of remorse. He rose, the folds of his robe brushing the stone floor. Keep me informed of any further letters or ravens, brother. For now I will prepare. If events in King's Landing unravel, Dorne must be ready to act. Doran nodded, and Oberyn departed, thoughts swirling with possibilities. He spent the evening in the training yard, body and mind restless. The yard glowed with torchlight, and the thick Dornish heat pressed down even after sunset. He sparred against two of the sand snakes who were present in Sunspear, Obella and Elia Sand, two of the younger of his brood. They circled him with wooden spears, while Oberyn wielded a whirling staff, twisting and spinning in a dance that left the watchers gasping. Despite the edge of his frustration, Oberyn felt a spark of pride at how quick they were becoming. His daughters, bastard-born though they were, possessed the same fire that coursed in his veins. Obella lunged. Oberyn deftly parried, sliding her spear aside. Elia feinted from behind, but Oberyn twisted away, hooking his staff around her ankle to tumble her gently to the sand. He stepped back, allowing them to regain their footing. You're both improving, Oberyn said, chest heaving from the exertion. But you must be unpredictable. The spear is more than a thrusting weapon. It can be used in 100 cunning ways if you let your instincts guide you. Obella nodded, sweat trickling down her brow. Teach us more, father. He almost smiled. I will, but not tonight. I have too many thoughts clouding my mind. You'll gain little from a teacher who cannot focus. Elia Sand lowered her spear, looking at her father with concern. Is it King's Landing again? Oberyn let the wooden staff rest on the ground, leaning on it. King's Landing always weighs on me, but tonight, it's the ghost of Tywin Lannister haunting my thoughts. The man I swore to kill is gone, yet his dog remains at large. His family remains in power. Obella lifted her chin. Let us avenge Aunt Elia. We are ready to fight if you call upon us. Oberyn studied the earnest fierceness in his daughter's eyes. It resonated with his own thirst for retribution, but he also felt a pang of caution. The time for vengeance will come, but not in rash leaps. For now, we sharpen our blades and sharpen our minds." They gave grudging nods. Oberyn embraced them both, feeling the warmth of their admiration. Then he left the yard, staff slung over his shoulder, stepping into the labyrinthine halls of Sunspear. He found Ilaria in their shared bedchamber, reading a letter by lamplight. She looked up when he entered, her expression uncertain. "Word arrived from a captain on the Plankytown route," she said. "He claims a Lannister ship has been sighted making for the port, presumably with an envoy. No official raven preceded them, so they're traveling in secret, or at least without formal announcement." Oberyn laid his staff against the wall, heart skipping a beat. A Lannister envoy, now? What do they hope to achieve by skulking into Dorne? Ilaria shook her head. "We can only guess." The captain's note was hurried. "He says the ship flies a Golden Lion banner, which suggests a direct emissary from Casterly Rock, or from King's Landing. We will know soon enough." The next morning, Oberyn met with Doran in a private alcove to discuss the rumored arrival. Doran's attendants scattered as the two princes leaned over a small chart of the coastline. "A secret mission, or half-secret at least," Doran mused. "Cersei would normally send a raven first if she wanted to negotiate publicly, but perhaps she does not wish to show weakness. Perhaps she fears the Tyrells." Oberyn placed one hand on the hilt of a short dagger at his belt, tapping it absently. "It could be a trap. We must be vigilant. Yet it could be an opportunity." Doran glanced down at the scabbard, then back to Oberyn's face. "I will send a few men to greet them politely, and to ensure we have the upper hand if anything is amiss. I suspect they come under the guise of forging or reinforcing alliances. Tywin's death has left House Lannister in disarray." Oberyn inclined his head. "Allow me to accompany those men. I want to see this envoy firsthand, glean whatever I can from their words, and from what they do not say." Doran studied Oberyn's expression, then sighed. "As you wish, but keep your temper in check. If they come with honeyed words, do not respond with venom. At least not yet." A day later, a mounted party rode out from Sunspear toward Plankytown, where the Greenblood River met the summer sea. The sun blazed overhead, and the heat shimmered along the dusty road, but Oberyn was accustomed to the furnace of Dornish weather. He wore light leathers and a loose tunic in pale yellow, pinned by a small sun and spear brooch. Alongside him rode half a dozen Dornish guards, men with spears and bows, their eyes scanning the horizon. Word had it that the Lannister ship had docked at Plankytown under minimal fanfare. The local harbor master had signaled that the passengers were disembarking just as Oberyn's group approached. When they arrived at the bustling port, they found a modest crowd milling about. Most were traders and sailors, some unloading casks of wine or barrels of salted fish. Near the docks stood three figures clad in traveling cloaks, 2 men and a woman. Oberyn recognized the crest on their small trunk, red on gold, the Lannister lion. He dismounted smoothly, handing his reins to one of the guards. As he approached the trio, they drew back their hoods. The tallest man was middle-aged with a receding hairline and the stern, wary look of a loyal retainer. The woman had flaxen hair coiled in a bun, her features sharp and watchful. But the third man gave Oberyn pause. He wore plain clothing of good quality, and though his face was set in a polite mask, Oberyn could see the glint of gold at his left wrist. A single-handed man. It was Jaime Lannister. Oberyn froze for a heartbeat, measuring the knight of the Kingsguard, unless that too had changed since Tywin's death. Jaime's once handsome features bore new lines of weariness, and the sleeve pinned at his left shoulder was empty, the stump hidden by his cloak. Their eyes locked. "Prince Oberyn," Jaime said, voice quiet. "I come as an envoy on behalf of the crown." Oberyn allowed a faint, ironic smile. "Ser Jaime, a surprise to see you here, traveling under the lion's banner with so small a retinue." Jaime gestured to the other two. "Ser Norvik and Lady Meredith accompany me for counsel and security. But yes, we come quietly. My sister, Her Grace, the Queen Regent, thought it best we arrive without fanfare." "And your father's funeral?" Oberyn asked bluntly. I assume that has already taken place? A flicker of pain crossed Jaime's face. It has. The realm moves on, with or without ceremony. Oberyn raised a brow but did not press the matter of Tywin's funeral. He turned slightly, indicating the men behind him. These are my guards. Come. Let us find an inn by the waterfront where we can speak in comfort. This heat can be oppressive if you're not accustomed to it. Jaime nodded, though his eyes darted around, wary. He had once visited Dorne as a young man, but things were different now. The group found a modest but well-kept inn. They settled at a long wooden table in a private alcove, the shutters open to let in a faint breeze carrying the brine of the sea. A servant brought wine Dornish red, bold and spiced. Jaime sipped it, made a face that might have been approval or distaste, then set the cup aside. Oberyn, across from him, watched with hooded eyes. He took a long swallow of his own wine before speaking. Well, Kingslayer, you have come a long way from King's Landing. I trust you have matters of importance to discuss, rather than a casual greeting. Jaime's expression hardened at the old epithet, but he let it pass. Yes, the Queen Regent wishes to reaffirm our alliance with Dorne. She has concerns that the betrothal of Princess Myrcella to Prince Trystane remains unsettled, given recent events. Recent events? Oberyn echoed softly, setting his wine cup down. You mean the demise of your father? Or do you refer to your brother's rumored role in that demise? Jaime's jaw tensed. I speak of the turmoil that threatens the realm. My father's death has left a void. The Tyrells are pressing for greater influence over Tommen. The Iron Throne must remain strong and stable. For that, we need Dorne's continued friendship. Oberyn inclined his head, a thin smile curving his lips. Friendship, is it? You mean you wish to ensure we don't stir up trouble while the Lannisters consolidate power? You want our neutrality or our loyalty? One of the companions, Ser Norvik, a man with grizzled hair and a worn face, shifted in his seat. Prince Oberyn, we come in good faith. The crown is prepared to make assurances that will favor Dorne. Queen Cersei is even willing to consider certain concessions regarding trade, or awarding certain lands in the Dornish marches that have long been disputed. Oberyn's eyes flicked to Norvik, then back to Jaime. And in return? Jaime's right hand rested on the table, fingers curling slightly against the wood. In return, we want Myrcella back in King's Landing. Her mother wishes to see her, to keep her close. The betrothal to Trystane can remain a formal promise, but Myrcella would be safer under her mother's watch, given the new uncertainties. We do not mean to offend by suggesting Dorne is unsafe, but the realm at large is in chaos. Better for the princess to remain in the capital, where the Kingsguard can protect her. Oberyn almost laughed. He could see the tension in Jaime's eyes, sensed the script that had been prepared by Cersei. She must have demanded that Jaime bring Myrcella home to strengthen her position. So Cersei wants her daughter at court, Oberyn said. How touching. And you truly believe Myrcella would be safer near the Viper's nest of the Iron Throne, with every schemer and assassin lurking in the shadows? Jaime's gaze did not waver. She would be with her family. Oberyn let the silence stretch, allowing the hum of the inn's patrons in the next room to fill the air. At last, he said, Ser Jaime, I doubt you are naive enough to think we will simply hand the girl over because her mother wishes it. We value peace, but we have not forgotten the crimes committed against my sister Elia during the last Targaryen civil strife. Myrcella's presence here is a way to ensure that House Lannister does not forget Dorne. Tywin's ghost might rest in a tomb, but the debt remains unpaid. The man called Ser Norvik spoke again, voice steeled. Prince Oberyn, your sister's death was a tragedy, but it happened decades ago. The crown regrets those events, but it is time to move forward. There is a new generation. Must the cycle of hatred continue? Oberyn's lips parted in a cold grin. Tragedy. Regrets. Polite words for the butchery of a princess of Dorne. His voice dipped low, though it did not rise in anger. I remember. My brother remembers. Our people remember. If you wish us to set aside that memory, you must give us something more than land or trade. Where is Gregor Clegane? The question hung in the air, heavy. Jaime's eyes narrowed. The man known as the Mountain was wounded. He is not well. Qyburn tends to him in secrecy. My sister does not permit anyone else to see him or to speak of him. Oberyn leaned back, crossing his arms. I thought as much. So you come seeking Myrcella, yet offer no means of justice against her mother's dog, who slaughtered my sister and her children. You speak of illusions of safety and the king's protection, but Dorne has done just fine protecting Myrcella thus far. Tell me, do you truly believe Cersei would not use the girl as a pawn if it served her interests? Jaime hesitated, the lines in his face deepening. My sister is the Queen Regent. She has obligations. She must secure the throne for Tommen, ensure stability. But that does not mean she has ill intentions for Myrcella. They are mother and daughter. Oberyn gave a dry laugh. Family does not protect one from cruelty, as Tyrion could attest if he were here. Your father nearly had him executed. Jaime's features flickered with pain. He exhaled. I will not argue the past. I can only say that the crown needs Dorne's goodwill. In exchange, we will see that your demands, whatever they may be, are weighed and addressed. If your concern is Gregor Clegane, perhaps an arrangement can be made. But Myrcella, do not presume to bargain with me over a living child. Oberyn cut in, voice quiet but sharp. You ask me to trust that you and your sister will do right by Dorne, yet you hold tight to the murderer of my sister. Worse, you keep him hidden, presumably to use again when it suits you. And you ask me to relinquish Myrcella. No, that is not how this will unfold. Jaime's single hand curled into a fist. A beat passed. Then Lady Meredith spoke, her tone diplomatic. We do not wish to provoke you, Prince Oberyn. We are only messengers entrusted with proposals. Could we not, at least, convey to the Queen Regent that you will consider terms, if they are favorable? Oberyn regarded her through half-lowered lids. I will tell you this. Prince Doran will consider any formal proposal that you present in writing. He will share it with the Lords of Dorne. We will respond in due course. But Myrcella remains where she is, under our guardianship. If your queen wants a conversation about the mountain or how to settle the old blood debts, let her speak plainly. No more illusions. Jaime pressed his lips into a thin line. We will relay your words to her grace. Oberyn offered a faint shrug. Then you have your answer. Unless you have something else to say, I suggest you remain in Planky Town for the night to rest. Then return to your ship and carry your tidings back to King's Landing. A tension-laden silence followed. Jaime's gaze flicked around the small alcove, as though he weighed whether further discussion might yield anything. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Very well. Oberyn inclined his head. I will provide a small escort to ensure you come to no harm while in Dorne. Do not stray. Our people have long memories, Ser Jaime. Jaime rose, and his companions followed suit. They bowed stiffly. Oberyn stood as well, noticing the clenched set of Jaime's jaw, the flicker of old pride and frustration behind his green eyes. Without further ceremony, they parted ways. Jaime and his party returned to the dockside, presumably to secure lodging for the night. Oberyn retrieved his horse, riding back toward Sunspear with his guards, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the dunes. When he arrived in the late evening, he went straight to Doran Solar. His brother was still awake, reading by lamplight. Oberyn recounted every word of the conversation. Doran listened with a measured calm that Oberyn found both admirable and maddening. So that is Cersei's plan, Doran mused softly. She aims to reclaim Myrcella. Not surprising. Tommen is young and malleable, but Myrcella might be a backup plan if something goes awry. Or perhaps Cersei simply wants to appear as a devoted mother in the eyes of the court. She never did like the notion of her daughter growing up away from her. Oberyn felt a surge of contempt for the Queen Regent. She didn't care enough to fight for Myrcella's presence before, only Tywin's arrangement. Now, with Tywin gone, she wants all the power in her own hands, including her child as a piece in the game. We cannot yield. Doran tilted his head. Did Jaime offer anything else regarding Gregor's condition? Only that Qyburn tends to him in secrecy, that he's gravely wounded or afflicted. They still hide him away. Likely Cersei thinks of him as her monstrous champion, to be unleashed again when needed. Doran's mouth tightened. Gregor remains a symbol of House Lannister's darkest cruelty. If we could secure him, bring him to Dorne. Oberyn arched a brow. We could exact the justice we've waited for. But you know as well as I do, Cersei will never hand him over. Unless the cost of keeping him is higher than the cost of letting him go. A moment of silence passed, broken by the night breeze stirring the curtains. Doran finally reached for a parchment. I will draft a response to the crown, stating that Myrcella remains safe here and is in no danger, but that we will not release her unless we have guarantees. Guarantees that might involve Gregor, Oberyn said. But do you truly believe Cersei would yield her pet monster? Doran's tone was carefully even. I doubt it. Still, we must position ourselves so that if chaos deepens in King's Landing, we gain advantage. The Tyrells may turn on Cersei if she grows too erratic. The Faith might rise in power, as the rumors of the High Sparrow suggest. The Lannisters are fractured by Tywin's death and Tyrion's absence. If the day comes that Cersei's enemies close in around her, she may be forced to bargain. Oberyn ran a hand over his closely trimmed beard, a sardonic glimmer in his eyes. We will ensure that day comes sooner or later, brother. Let us watch carefully. Jaime will bring Cersei your response. We'll see how she reacts. Doran dipped his quill, beginning to pen a letter. Yes, now leave me to this work, Oberyn. I know you are restless, but we must be patient still. With a resigned nod, Oberyn departed. The corridors of Sunspear were quieter than usual, the hush of deep night settling over the fortress. He found Ellaria waiting in their chamber, lighting a small perfumed lamp to mask the day's lingering heat. Her expression was unreadable as he recounted his meeting with Jaime. So your guess was correct, she said. They want Myrcella back. They do? Oberyn muttered, pouring himself a cup of water. His throat felt parched from the ride and the intensity of the confrontation. But they won't have her, not without giving us something far more valuable. Ellaria leaned against the bed frame, crossing her arms over her light robe. Jaime, how did he seem? You've exchanged letters, but this is the first time you've spoken since that day you refused to champion Tyrion. Oberyn considered her question. He seemed haunted, older than his years. I suspect he's torn between loyalty to his sister, grief for his father, and regret over Tyrion's fate. Yet he came here anyway. That tells me Cersei's hold on him is still strong enough. Do you think he believed the Crown's talk of making deals over Gregor? Oberyn shook his head. He probably knows it's a hollow offer, or at best an empty promise. He's doing his duty, or trying to hold the realm together in his own limited way. Ellaria sighed. That poor girl, Myrcella. She's better off here, truly. She is, Oberyn agreed. And so she shall remain. Let the Lannisters stew in their desperate attempts to strengthen themselves. Our time will come. That night, Oberyn's dreams were disjointed. He saw Elia's face, her features lit by candlelight. She reached out to him, whispered that justice was near, but then her voice faded into the darkness. He saw Jaime Lannister kneeling, a single golden hand extended in a plea. A monstrous shadow loomed behind them both, wearing a twisted helm shaped like a skull. He woke with his heart pounding, Ellaria's hand on his arm, murmuring reassurance in his ear. Days passed, and the Lannister party left Dorne. Oberyn received a final word from Jaime, brief, polite, acknowledging the letter that Doran would send. Then they boarded their ship. Soon after, a raven flew from Sunspear northward, carrying Doran's carefully worded missive. The stage was set for a new round of negotiations, or perhaps for a standoff that might end in bloodshed if Cersei's temper flared. For the next few weeks, Oberyn busied himself with matters of Sunspear's governance and the training of his daughters. The political situation in Westeros continued to churn. Reports came that Cersei had begun quarreling openly with the Tyrells. The Iron Bank of Bravos was rumored to be pressing the crown for repayment of debts. Debts Tywin had largely managed, which now fell upon Cersei's shoulders. There were whispers that the High Septon had died under suspicious circumstances and that a new religious leader, a so-called High Sparrow, was gaining influence in the capital. Meanwhile, no word came about Tyrion. Some claimed he had fled overseas to Pentos or to Volantis, carried by Varys' secret channels. Others insisted he lurked in Westeros still, plotting fresh vengeance against his sister. Oberyn could not guess which tale was true, but a small part of him wished the dwarf well. If Tyrion had truly slain Tywin, perhaps that was partial justice for Elia, though not enough for Oberyn's taste. Gregor remained out of reach. Then, late one afternoon, a new raven arrived bearing the royal seal. Oberyn joined Doran in the Tower Solar to open it. They read it together. A letter from Cersei Lannister, bristling with formal courtesy but tinged with veiled threats. She insisted that Myrcella be returned to King's Landing at once, under the watchful eye of a Lannister-appointed escort. She even cited the betrothal to Trystane as a reason Myrcella ought to appear at court, so that the realm might see the union as a sign of peace between Dorne and the Crown. She made no mention of Gregor by name, only that the Crown's champions had pressing duties in King's Landing and could not be discussed further. Doran read the final lines and handed the parchment to Oberyn, who let out a scoffing breath. She all but threatens war if we keep the girl here. Yet she stops short of making any direct demand, as though she fears losing Tyrell's support. Precisely, Doran murmured. She is trying to apply pressure without alienating the Tyrells, who still view Myrcella's presence in Dorne as a potential alliance bridging the south. Cersei cannot appear too hostile, or the Tyrells might question Tommen's betrothal to Margaery. So what is our reply? Oberyn asked. Doran set the letter down. We stall. We state that Myrcella is recovering from a slight illness. Nothing dangerous, but she cannot travel. We reassure the Crown that Myrcella is well cared for and that, when she is recovered, we may reconsider a visit to King's Landing, provided the security arrangements are satisfactory. In the meantime, we request that certain old grievances be addressed. For instance, the arms of House Clegane remain a sore point in Dorne, and we question whether Ser Gregor still holds any official position. Oberyn allowed himself a cold smile. You mean we feign concern for Myrcella's health while reminding them that we have not forgotten the mountain? A game of polite deception. Doran nodded. Exactly. We keep them dancing. The longer Cersei remains entangled in the capital's intrigues, the more likely it is she will make enemies of the Tyrells or the Faith. By the time she is in a true bind, we will have more leverage. Oberyn's gaze flicked to the open window, where the light of the late sun turned the horizon golden red. He let out a breath that carried equal parts frustration and anticipation. I trust your wisdom, brother, but if a chance arises for me to strike at Gregor, I will not hold you back, Doran said softly, though we must weigh the cost. For now, be patient. We have not heard the last of Cersei Lannister's demands. Time passed in slow rhythms after that exchange of letters. The heat of Dorne pressed on day by day, and small details of governance filled the hours. Harvest totals from the coastal villages, shipments of spice from the summer isles passing through the planky town, the vigilant watch on the Dornish marches, where petty lords still bickered across the border with the Reach. Oberyn tried to distract himself, to let his anger rest. But a coil of tension remained in his stomach, particularly at night when he felt the old ghosts stirring. Now and then, a new rumor would trickle in from the rest of Westeros. Cersei had turned her attention to the Faith, granting them renewed authority. A High Sparrow was cleansing King's Landing of sin, punishing whores and devout sinners alike. Margaery Tyrell's star was rising as the beloved young queen, while Cersei simmered with jealousy. Jaime Lannister had departed the city on some errand. No one knew precisely what. Some said he traveled to the Riverlands to treat with the remnants of the Tully forces. Others speculated that he was on a secret quest to retrieve something for the Queen Regent. More interestingly, Oberyn heard that Qyburn had been named Master of Whispers, stepping into Varys' old role after the spider vanished. If that was so, then Gregor's caretaker now had the ear of the Queen. That knowledge sent a flash of cold through Oberyn's veins. A man who meddled in unnatural arts, who treated men like experiments, had the mountain at his mercy. Now and then, Myrcella would wander the gardens of Sunspear, laughing softly with Trystane. She was a bright-eyed girl on the cusp of womanhood, her golden hair catching the sunlight. Oberyn watched her sometimes from afar, uncertain whether he pitied her or admired her composure. She spoke in gentle tones with Trystane, discussing the hawks in the mews or the flowers that adorned the courtyard. If she felt fear or longing for her mother, she kept it well hidden. Ellaria once approached Oberyn as he watched the young pair in the orchard. "You know, Myrcella does not seem unhappy. Perhaps we truly are giving her a kinder home than she might have had in King's Landing." He nodded, arms folded. "I believe so. In a way, I envy her innocence. She does not know how vile her mother's court can be." Ellaria touched Oberyn's shoulder. "If we can shield her from that cruelty, perhaps it is something of a reparation for what your sister endured. We cannot change the past, but we can ensure no child suffers the fate Elia's children did." Oberyn turned to her, laying a hand atop hers. "Yes, that is partly why I have tolerated so many of Doran's patient ploys. I do not wish to see a child harmed. But if Cersei tries to rip her away by force—" He did not finish the thought. Ellaria squeezed his hand, and together they turned away from Myrcella and Trystane. That evening, a fresh raven arrived with a letter from King's Landing. The script was jagged and hasty, bearing no signature but sealed with the royal seal. Doran read it once, then read it again, brow furrowing. "Oberyn, you must see this." Oberyn skimmed the contents and felt a jolt of surprise. The letter demanded that a formal delegation from Dorne come to King's Landing to attend the royal wedding of Tommen and Margaery, which had been hastily arranged to quell rumors of tension. They wanted Prince Doran or Prince Oberyn to appear alongside Myrcella, an overt demonstration of unity. The letter's tone was strident, even menacing. It implied that refusal would be taken as an insult to the crown. "They want a puppet show," Oberyn said grimly, tapping the parchment. "They want Dorne to parade Myrcella before the court, so that all can see how kindly the Lannisters and Martells get along." Doran pursed his lips. "And if we refuse?" Oberyn shrugged. "Cersei may incite rumors of Dornish treachery. She could claim we're imprisoning Myrcella or stirring rebellion. Margaery might not believe it, but others might. And the Tyrells, for all their ambition, will not necessarily oppose the crown if they think we pose a threat." Doran stared at the letter for a moment, then rubbed a hand over his temples. "Perhaps we should go, at least to preserve the appearance of cooperation. But I am not certain I trust the capital to treat Myrcella kindly if we do. She might be seized. Cersei might attempt to keep her there, defying any promise to return her." "That is exactly what will happen," Oberyn said darkly. "Cersei will never let Myrcella leave again if she can help it. If we bring her to the wedding, we risk losing her to the Lannisters' grasp." Doran set the letter aside. "But refusing might push us toward open conflict." A taut silence fell. Oberyn was reminded of the day, months ago, when he'd refused to champion Tyrion. Every choice carried a price, every path a risk. At last, he spoke. "We might send a delegation without Myrcella. We can claim that she has not fully recovered from her illness. Let them fume. We appear cooperative by sending an envoy, but we do not yield the girl." Doran tapped a finger on the table. "Yes, that might be best. Who should we send?" Oberyn's first impulse was to volunteer himself. He was curious how matters stood in King's Landing and whether he might glean a chance to finish Gregor. But he also knew his presence there would inflame Cersei. "If I go, Cersei may feel provoked or attempt some cunning trap. I'm not exactly on good terms with her." Doran offered a thin, wry smile. "True. And if she attempts anything violent, I fear your reaction might be dramatic." Oberyn almost laughed. "You're not wrong." He sobered. "What of Arianne? She is your heir and a skilled courtier. She might represent Dorne with poise, though I know she has her own ambitions." Doran lowered his gaze. "Arianne is headstrong. I've kept her close in Dorne for a reason. If she goes to King's Landing, she might be swept up in intrigues well beyond her readiness." "Then Prince Quentyn?" Oberyn suggested. Doran grimaced faintly. He is too bookish, too gentle for King's Landing's vipers. Besides, his path may lie elsewhere. Oberyn did not pry into that cryptic remark. Doran often spoke in half-revealed hints when it came to Quentyn. So who, then? One of the sand snakes is too young for such a mission, and the older ones are even more fiery than I. Doran was silent for a few moments, face thoughtful. At length he said, "Perhaps I should go myself. My gout is a burden, but the show of respect might carry weight. Cersei would have to treat me with the courtesy due a prince of Dorne. She cannot risk insulting me in front of the Tyrells and the rest of the court." Oberyn frowned. "But your health." "I will manage," Doran said. "I have done so for years. If I bring a trusted escort, you remaining here, it might be enough to keep Cersei in check. She would not dare harm me, for fear of your wrath and the wrath of all Dorne." A reluctant admiration sparked in Oberyn's chest. "You are clever, brother. But are you certain you wish to place yourself in the lion's den?" Doran's lips curved in a slight, determined smile. "If we do nothing, or if we refuse outright, we risk a deeper rift. It is time for me to see King's Landing with my own eyes, to gauge the situation, to speak with Marjorie if possible. And you will remain in Dorne, safeguarding Myrcella." Oberyn exhaled, nodding slowly. "Very well. I trust your judgment, though I hate the thought of you exposed to their plots. At least I won't have to hold my tongue in that wretched city again." Doran beckoned him closer, resting a hand on Oberyn's arm. "Your refusal to fight in Tyrion's trial was a sacrifice of pride for the sake of Dorne. Now, allow me to make my own sacrifice of comfort. We each do what we must." Oberyn clasped his brother's hand. "Write to them, then. Inform Cersei you will attend the wedding, but Myrcella remains here, still recovering. She will fume, but if the Tyrells see this as cooperation, they will not press the matter." The plan was put into motion swiftly. Doran's retinue was selected, 15 knights and lords of Dorne, some of his personal servants to attend his health needs, and a small group of palace functionaries to handle diplomatic matters. Oberyn saw to every detail of their security, ensuring they traveled with enough men to deter bandits or any unscrupulous attempt by the crown. Weeks later, under the scorching Dornish sun, Doran's party departed Sunspear to sail around the coast toward King's Landing. A great many of the local lords gathered to bid him farewell, uncertain if the journey might herald a new era of peace or the seeds of war. Oberyn watched from the docks, Ellaria at his side, as Doran's ship cast off. The Prince of Dorne was seated in a wheeled chair on the quarterdeck, shading his face from the glare. He raised a hand in a final wave to Oberyn, who returned the gesture gravely. When the ship had vanished over the horizon, Oberyn let out a low sigh. Ellaria slipped her arm through his. "He will be all right," she said. Oberyn nodded, turning away. "From the sea. I pray so. Come, we have much to do. If Cersei is planning some treachery, we must be prepared." They walked back through the winding streets to Sunspear, where Myrcella awaited news of the wedding. She had asked tearfully if she might go to see her brother Tommen wed. Doran's official stance was that her health was too delicate to risk the voyage. Oberyn had felt a stab of guilt at that lie, but it was necessary. In the days that followed, Oberyn kept a wary vigil. He reinforced the guard around Myrcella and Trystane, ensuring no stealthy kidnappers might attempt to seize her. He also sent discreet scouts to watch the northern roads leading into Dorne, in case the crown tried a land route invasion. At the same time, Oberyn found himself restless. The coiled serpent of vengeance that lived within him stirred whenever he thought of King's Landing. Part of him wished he had gone, simply to see Gregor with his own eyes, and perhaps finish what he once started. Ellaria noticed his tension. One afternoon, while they sparred with light practice swords, she knocked his blade aside with a swift parry. "Your thoughts are not here," she said, stepping close. He rolled his wrist to free his blade, their practice weapons crossing in a gentle clash. "My thoughts are in King's Landing, or with my brother, or with the mountain." She lowered her sword, dark eyes searching his. "It does you no good to brood. You chose to stay to guard Myrcella. No one else in Dorne is as fierce as you, or as determined." If something goes wrong at the wedding, Doran has men to protect him, and Doran has his own cunning. Trust him. Oberyn's lips curved in a slight, rueful smile. I do, but I cannot silence the desire to be in the thick of it. Ever since I let that duel slip away, he trailed off, eyes distant. Ellaria laid her free hand on his chest. You're not the only one who regrets that day, but perhaps it was for the best. You are here, alive, able to fight another day. One day that fight will come. He nodded, letting her words soothe the razor edge of his thoughts. Then they resumed their sparring until the sweat dripped down their bodies in the searing Dornish sun. Time, like a slow serpent, wound forward. Reports eventually trickled south that the royal wedding had taken place. Margaery Tyrell was officially crowned queen beside Tommen. The festivities were overshadowed by rumors that Cersei was losing her grip on power. Some said the queen regent was enmeshed in conflict with the faith, who demanded purity and penance from the highest lords and ladies. Others mentioned that the new King's Council was fractious, with Kevan Lannister at odds with Cersei. But no direct word arrived from Doran, nor from his retinue. Oberyn grew increasingly uneasy. Every day, he would ask the maester if any raven had come bearing Doran's seal. Each day, the maester shook his head in regret. The nights passed slowly. Oberyn found it difficult to sleep. He roamed the corridors of Sunspear, a restless shadow, stepping onto balconies to gaze at the star-filled sky, wondering if his brother lived or had fallen prey to Cersei's machinations. One evening, Ellaria found him perched on a stone bench in the open-air gallery. A few small braziers flickered, casting dancing flames against the mosaic floor. She sat beside him, slipping her hand into his. "You think he's in danger," she said. "I fear it," Oberyn admitted. "But Doran is no fool. If Cersei tried to imprison him, the Tyrells would protest. Surely, it would be a direct affront to Dorne, and the Tyrells loathe open conflict so long as it might risk their position." Ellaria stroked her thumb over his knuckles. "He will send word as soon as he can." Dorne's acceptance of the wedding invitation was a sign of good faith. Cersei cannot cast that aside lightly. Before Oberyn could reply, footsteps echoed in the gallery. One of the palace guards approached swiftly, breathless. "My prince, a raven has arrived from King's Landing. The maester says it bears Prince Doran's seal." Oberyn shot to his feet, heart pounding. Ellaria followed as he hurried to the maester's chambers. There, the maester greeted him with a parchment, the wax unbroken. Oberyn seized it, cracked the seal, and unrolled the letter. Doran's handwriting was there, calm and measured. Oberyn's eyes devoured each line. Relief flickered through him. Doran was alive, still in King's Landing. He wrote that the wedding had taken place with great pomp, that Margaery was radiant and Tommen seemed smitten. Cersei had been polite to Doran, if chilly, and had pressed him again about Myrcella. Doran had demurred, repeating the story of her delicate health. So far, no direct threat had been made. Cersei appeared occupied with attempts to outmaneuver the Tyrells in the small council. However, the letter also relayed a troubling rumor. The faith militant was rising again, thanks to the new High Sparrow. Already, they had begun arresting people in the city on charges of fornication or moral crimes. Doran feared that the chaos might spiral. He added that Qyburn's presence was growing at court. Whispers suggested some new member of the Kingsguard was soon to be anointed, a massive figure rumored to never speak and never remove his helm. Doran did not confirm the name, but Oberyn's blood ran cold at the obvious implication. He read the final lines, where Doran urged patience. The letter concluded with a cryptic note. The lioness invests her hope in the silent giant. If truth is what we suspect, then justice remains elusive, for now. Oberyn lowered the parchment slowly, eyes blazing. So Cersei was indeed forging Qyburn's monstrous creation into a new Kingsguard. Perhaps Gregor or the shadow of Gregor, if that abomination could still be called a man. The knowledge churned Oberyn's stomach with revulsion. He drew a long breath, lifting his gaze to Ellaria. Doran's letter confirms my fears. Cersei means to unleash the mountain again, though in some twisted form. He might bear a new name, a new face, but we know who lurks beneath that armor. Illyria's lips thinned. We cannot strike at him from here, can we? Oberyn shook his head. Not easily, unless Doran finds an opening at court, or the Tyrells demand a trial or confrontation. For now, we can do little but wait. The days stretched into weeks, then months. Letters trickled from Doran, each describing how King's Landing was caught in a storm of religious fervor. Cersei had armed the faith militant, possibly believing she could control them, but it was backfiring. The High Sparrow demanded piety from everyone, highborn and low. Marjorie Tyrell and some of her family fell under scrutiny for alleged sins. In the midst of it all, Doran remained a placid observer, offering no offense to the faith. He waited for a chance to strengthen Dorne's position, or to depart safely with whatever advantages he could gather. Cersei, rumored to be at odds with nearly everyone, found fewer allies by the day. Whispers told of a humiliating turn for the Queen Regent, forced into a walk of atonement for her own alleged sins. By the time Oberyn read that news, he felt a strange mixture of grim amusement and frustration. The entire realm was in upheaval. Yet the mountain, or his silent reflection, still guarded Cersei, apparently unstoppable. Then came the letter that shook all of Dorne. Doran was returning. He had secured a royal decree that recognized Myrcella's betrothal to Trystane and pledged to settle certain border disputes with the Stormlands in Dorne's favor. In exchange, Doran had agreed to remain publicly supportive of Tommen's reign and to continue paying lip service to the crown's authority. No mention of Gregor or justice for Elia, though the letter hinted at private negotiations that remained unresolved. Doran's tone suggested that conditions in King's Landing had become so precarious that further presence there was too dangerous. Within a fortnight, the Prince of Dorne's ship came into port. Oberyn stood on the docks, scanning the horizon. When at last the vessel dropped anchor, he saw Doran, thinner, perhaps more fatigued, gazing from the deck, accompanied by his retinue. Oberyn helped his brother disembark, ensuring the wheeled chair was lifted onto the quay. Applause and cheers broke out from the dockworkers and bystanders, for Doran was well loved. When the immediate greetings subsided, Oberyn escorted Doran to a private chamber in Sunspear, ordering wine and fresh fruit. Doran looked exhausted, but an undercurrent of determination sparkled in his eyes. "So it is done," Oberyn said softly, once the chamber door was shut. "You've returned, safe and whole." Doran nodded. King's Landing was a nest of vipers indeed. The Tyrells, the Faith, the Lannisters, each gnawing at the other. The city has rarely been in such a state of disarray. I achieved what I could, securing official recognition for Myrcella and Trystane, ensuring certain territorial claims for Dorne. But as for the mountain, he paused, drawing a deep breath. The rumors are true. Qyburn has outfitted him in new armor, calling him Ser Robert Strong. He never speaks, never removes his helm, yet stands as a silent sentinel by Cersei's side. Everyone believes it is Gregor in some unnatural guise. The Faith demanded to see his face, but Cersei insisted he had taken holy vows of silence. The High Sparrow, ironically, was too busy dealing with other matters to press harder. Oberyn's jaw tightened. "So the beast lives, and your negotiations bought us no justice." "None," Doran said sadly. "Cersei will not yield him for trial in Dorne. She claims all crimes died with Gregor's alleged demise. This new creation, she says, is a different man altogether." Oberyn let out a bitter laugh. "Convenient. So Elia is denied again. The monster stands." Doran reached out, taking Oberyn's hand. "Listen, brother. I spoke with Kevan Lannister, who seemed disinclined to support Cersei's madness. But he, too, fears confrontation with this Ser Robert Strong. The man, if he is still a man, kills any who provoke him. If Cersei remains in power, we have no chance of prying her champion from her. But the realm is shifting. The Tyrells may eventually move against her. The Faith might tighten its grip. Sooner or later, events will tear King's Landing apart. And we watch from afar," Oberyn said, voice tinged with resentment. "We do," Doran agreed gently. "Better to wait than to wage a war we're not ready for. If the crown collapses under its own weight, that is the moment to strike or to negotiate from a position of strength. Patience, Oberyn. Elia's memory is not forgotten." Oberyn's eyes closed, images of Elia flickering through his mind. He drew a careful breath. "You are right, as always. I will wait. The day will come." In the weeks that followed Doran's return, life in Dorne began to settle into its familiar rhythms once more. Trade resumed, the lords and ladies of Sunspear attended to local matters, and Myrcella resumed her gentle companionship with Trystane, now bolstered by the formal recognition of their betrothal. She still sometimes asked after her mother or her brother, but seldom pressed for permission to return to King's Landing. Perhaps she sensed the tension beneath every mention of the city. One day, Oberyn found himself strolling along the outer walls of Sunspear with Ellaria. The afternoon sun was mercifully mild, and a fresh wind blew in from the sea. In the distance, gulls circled above the harbor. "Have you made peace with it all?" Ellaria asked after a long silence. Oberyn turned to her, the wind ruffling his dark hair. "Peace, no. Acceptance, perhaps. Tywin is dead. Tyrion is gone. Cersei clings to power with a monstrous champion at her side. My brother has gleaned some concessions for Dorne, but not the one I wanted most. The mountain's head. There is no peace in me." She slipped her arm through his. "And yet you live and Dorne prospers for now. Perhaps that is enough to keep us moving forward." He glanced toward the far horizon where the sea met the sky. "I once believed the only justice for Elia would be the brute force of my spear. I still believe Gregor must die. But if the realm is devouring itself, maybe that justice will come in another form. One day something will give. Someone, whether the Tyrells, the Faith, or another cunning player, will topple Cersei. Then we will see if her silent giant can stand against the will of a kingdom." Ellaria reached up, brushing a light kiss against his cheek. "We can wait. The seeds of vengeance are planted in more places than you know." They strolled onward, steps measured against the sun-warmed stone. Oberyn felt a tension within him that had once been an inferno, now banked to a slow burn. He had refused Tyrion's plea for a trial by combat, keeping himself alive, and that choice had led to countless twists and turns. Tyrion had found a way to strike at Tywin, though it left Gregor untouched. The realm reeled in the aftermath of Tywin's death, and Oberyn had watched from afar, preserving Dornish strength at Doran's urging. Was this the fate he had chosen? A life in which vengeance was postponed, perhaps indefinitely, while the ghosts of Elia and her children hovered on the edge of every dream? Or was there still a road that led to final confrontation, where the mountain, Ser Robert Strong, would face him at last? He did not know, but as he gazed out at the rolling sea, he felt the desert wind on his face and tasted the salt on his lips. He remembered that in Dorne, fire and blood ran hot, but the spirit of survival was even stronger. He would not dash himself against the rocks in a single burst of fury. He would wait, coil his power, and strike when the moment was right. For now, Dorne's prince had chosen caution. He had refused a duel that might have killed him. He had turned away from a city that lured him with the promise of easy revenge. And yet, somewhere deep within the Red Viper, a part of him whispered that the dance was not over. The mountain had not fallen. The Viper had not taken its final strike. Fate still turned its wheel across Westeros, and Oberyn Martell intended to be there when it came full circle, no matter how long it took. So he stayed in Sunspear, a living contradiction, a lover of life, a cunning political agent, and a man haunted by the unslaked thirst for justice. He trained in the spear yard with his daughters, wrote letters to acquaintances in King's Landing and beyond, and awaited new tidings with each raven's arrival. Little by little, the shape of the realm continued to shift. In the north, conflicts raged between the Boltons and those who would not kneel. In the Riverlands, the remnants of the Tully loyalists still clung to illusions of restoring their lands. Across the narrow sea, a rumor spread of Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, forging her own empire. But in Dorne, Behind sun-scorched walls, Oberyn watched and bided his time. When the final day came, whatever day destiny decreed, he would stand face to face with the man who had butchered Elia Martell, or with the monstrous thing that pretended to be a knight. And on that day, Oberyn would have no regrets. He would drive his spear as deep as the hatred in his heart, or else he would fall knowing he had done all he could. Until then, he breathed in the hot Dornish air and let the months flow by like grains of sand through an hourglass. He could wait. Dorne could wait. The wheels of vengeance turned slowly, but they turned all the same. And in his dreams, he sometimes heard his sister's voice, a gentle murmur of hope, urging him onward, whispering that though Tywin had died without confession, though the mountains still roamed in unnatural life, all debts in this world were eventually paid. In those midnight hours, Oberyn Martell would wake with his teeth clenched and his heart pounding, certain of one truth above all. The story was not finished. He was still the Red Viper. One day, fate would call him north again, or beckon him to the heart of the realm's final reckoning. When that day came, he would be ready. So ended the tale of Oberyn Martell's refusal to champion Tyrion, a choice that changed the very balance of power in King's Landing and beyond. It left the imp to forge his own path, one that led to a crossbow bolt in Tywin's chest, and it let the Red Viper live to fight another day. The mountain endured, resurrected in a macabre shell, bound to Cersei's side. Dorne bided its time, guided by Prince Doran's quiet cunning. But the embers of vengeance glowed in Oberyn's soul, undiminished. One day he would strike. One day, the old ghosts would find rest, and Elia's name would be avenged in the only language Westeros truly understood: blood for blood and fire for fire. Until then, the Red Viper dreamed, and honed his spear, and waited for the final coil of destiny to tighten its hold upon them all.